All right, so we're diving into this handbook you shared, Urban Independence, a guide to self-sufficiency in city living. Looks like you're interested in urban agriculture.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. We'll be focusing on chapter 2, which covers starting your own balcony garden or even joining like a community orchard. Have you had any experience with this kind of stuff before?
Well, I've always been interested in gardening,
Yeah,
but living in an apartment has definitely presented some
yeah. Space constraints.
space constraints.
I
Yeah.
get that.
So this handbook has been really eye-opening. It's given me all sorts of ideas for how to bring some of that green energy into my life, even without a ton of space.
For sure. I think a lot of people feel that way, especially those of us living in cities.
Yeah.
One thing I found really interesting is the handbook emphasizes that urban agriculture, it's not just some like trendy thing,
Right.
it's really offering solutions to problems cities face, like, reducing environmental impact and even food security.
Absolutely. And one of the coolest things I learned is how urban agriculture can really shrink a city's carbon footprint. I mean,
Yeah.
think about all the transportation involved in getting food from rural farms to your plate in the city.
Yeah, that's a lot of gas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And growing food locally, well, that cuts down on those emissions big time. Plus, these urban farms and gardens, they can actually create green spaces and boost biodiversity, which helps with all the climate change stuff.
It's like a little oasis right in the middle of the city.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just the environmental benefits either. The handbook highlights how urban agriculture, it brings people together.
Makes the city feel a little less like a concrete jungle.
Right. Community gardens are the perfect example. It's a space to connect with your neighbors, learn new skills, and all work towards a common goal.
Yeah.
And when people feel more connected to their community, well, they're more likely to participate in all those other things that make a city thrive, you know?
It's like it strengthens the fabric
Yeah.
of the city.
Exactly. And the handbook lays out a really clear definition of what urban agriculture actually is. It goes way beyond just a couple of plants on your windowsill.
I've got to say that was one of the things that really impressed me about this handbook.
Yeah,
It wasn't just like, here's how to grow a tomato plant. It was about a whole system.
exactly. It's about cultivating, processing, and distributing food all within city limits. A
Mhm.
whole cycle.
So it's almost like its own little ecosystem.
Totally. And what's really cool is how the handbook really hammers home that this isn't just some like niche hobby for a select few.
Yeah, it seemed like they were going for that practical approach, like addressing real issues. I think it definitely delivers.
Absolutely. It's about responding to those real urban challenges that we face today, like finding ways to grow food sustainably in a limited space.
Speaking of space, the next section covers balcony and rooftop gardening. I loved this part. It was packed with tips on how to maximize even the smallest spaces. I felt like this section was really written for someone who's like, okay, I'm ready to get my hands dirty. But they're like, I live in a tiny apartment.
Exactly. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And what stood out to me was how much they emphasized space optimization, like thinking vertically.
Getting creative.
Yes, using trellises, wall-mounted planters, you name it. And the handbook talks about picking compact plant varieties that do really well in containers.
I was actually surprised by how many different things you can grow in containers.
Oh, me too. Herbs are a good place to start, but they even talk about dwarf fruit trees. Imagine that, fresh fruit right from your balcony.
I know, right? That would be amazing.
It really shows you that even if you're in a tiny apartment, you can still create your own little green haven.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's get really futuristic because the next section talks about indoor and vertical farming. I'll be honest, this stuff blew my mind. It's like taking the whole urban agriculture concept and like amping it up.
Oh, absolutely. This section dives into those techniques that are totally changing how we think about growing food in cities.
Yeah.
Imagine entire farms, but they're stacked upwards inside these climate-controlled buildings.
That's wild.
It's like something out of a science fiction movie,
I know.
but it's actually happening right now in cities around the world.
I know. It's incredible, right?
Mm.
And it uses some seriously cool technology like hydroponics and aquaponics, where plants are grown in these nutrient solutions instead of soil. And the lighting systems, they use LEDs that are like mini suns, giving plants the perfect light all year round, no matter what the weather's doing outside.
It's incredible, and one of the most remarkable things about indoor and vertical farming is how efficient it is.
That's what really stood out to me too. I was amazed by how much less water these farms use compared to traditional farms.
Oh yeah, like way less. The handbook was saying some vertical farms use up to 90% less water. It's a total game changer for cities dealing with water shortages.
Not to mention all those transportation costs and emissions we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It
Mm.
just makes so much sense bringing the farm closer to the table.
This section really showcases how innovative urban agriculture can be. Like, it's not just about doing things the way they've always been done. It's about finding new ways to meet our needs in the 21st century.
It's a testament to human ingenuity.
Right. And I think it speaks to our desire to find solutions to these complex problems that we're facing, like climate change and food security.
Absolutely. It's like, okay, we've got this challenge. How can we solve it in a way that benefits everyone? And urban agriculture is a big part of that.
I love that.
And
It's
ref-
about taking those challenges and turning them into opportunities.
Right. And while these high-tech indoor farms are incredible, the handbook doesn't forget about the more community-driven side of things. The next section is all about community gardens and urban orchards. To me, that's really the heart and soul of the urban agriculture movement. It's where the passion and the community spirit really shine through.
Yeah, I totally agree. These community gardens and urban orchards, they're not just about growing food.
It's about bringing people together.
Yeah, fostering a sense of shared responsibility for our local food systems.
Exactly. It's like a microcosm of a more sustainable and resilient society.
These spaces offer so many benefits, like a sense of belonging, learning from experienced gardeners.
Meeting people from all walks of life.
It's about more than just the produce. It's about the human connection.
And the handbook really emphasizes how these shared spaces can help build community resilience, especially when we're talking about challenges like climate change or economic uncertainty. When people come together to grow food and share resources,
It creates this network of support.
right, a kind of safety net for the community. They're strengthening their local food system and becoming more self-reliant, which is so important in uncertain times.
Plus, these gardens often become educational hubs, teaching people about sustainability, nutrition, and the importance of local food systems.
It's like a hands-on classroom for all ages. And the handbook even gives really practical advice on how to find one near you or even start your own.
I thought that was great. It empowers people to get involved and make a difference.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we're not just passive consumers. We can be active participants in shaping a more sustainable and resilient food system. And, what's really exciting is that this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore in this handbook.
Oh, absolutely. Chapters on energy independence, water sustainability, even urban foraging. It's like a treasure chest for anyone
Yeah.
who wants to live a more self-sufficient and sustainable life in the city.
It really is. And I can't wait to dig into those other chapters and see what other gems we can uncover.
Me too. Well, let's take a break and then come back to explore some of those other amazing ideas.
It's fascinating how this handbook, it really ties those practical gardening tips into this bigger picture of urban resilience. Like it's not just about growing tomatoes. It's
Right.
about this whole idea of creating a city that can kind of take care of itself.
I know it's really cool how they weave that throughout the whole thing. Like each chapter builds on the last one, showing how everything's connected. One thing that really surprised me was that section on indoor and vertical farming.
Oh.
I had no idea how advanced it had gotten. Like growing all that food in such a small space using hydroponics and LED lights, it's incredible.
It's like mind-blowing, right? The handbook explains that these indoor farms can just operate year-round no matter what the weather's like outside.
Yeah, no matter what.
And because they're right there in the city, they cut down on all that transportation, which means lower costs and fewer emissions.
And the water efficiency, too. I was reading that some vertical farms use like 90% less water than traditional agriculture.
Yeah.
That's a game changer, especially for cities that are struggling with water shortages.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about saving water. Indoor
Mhm.
farms can also reduce the need for pesticides and herbicides.
Oh, that's right.
So you end up with a cleaner and healthier food supply. And the coolest part is that this technology is constantly evolving.
So who knows what the future holds?
Exactly. We're only scratching the surface of what's possible with indoor and vertical farming.
It really makes you wonder what the future of food production will look like. Imagine a city where you could just get fresh, locally grown produce any time of year. That would be incredible.
It's a vision that's becoming more and more attainable.
I'm here for it.
Hmm.
But while all this high-tech stuff is super cool, the handbook also reminds us that we can make a difference on a smaller scale, too.
Whoa.
The section on community gardens and urban orchards really spoke to me.
Me too. I love the idea of taking those unused spaces in the city and turning them into these vibrant gardens. It's about reclaiming them for the community and giving people a chance to connect with nature and each other.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about like beautifying the neighborhood. It's about that sense of shared ownership and responsibility that comes with working together in a garden.
Right. Community gardens, they offer this space where people can come together to learn, grow food, and build relationships.
The handbook even had some practical advice on how to actually start a community garden,
Hmm.
like how to find a good location and all of the regulations you need to navigate.
Yeah, I thought that was really helpful. It empowers people to take action in their own communities.
I know, it's great. It's a good reminder that we don't have to wait for someone else to fix things. We can be the change ourselves.
No, one thing that really jumped out at me was the handbook's emphasis on biodiversity. It encourages urban farmers to grow a variety of crops instead of just focusing on the most popular or profitable
Oh,
ones.
that's a good point. Biodiversity is so important for healthy ecosystems. It's not just about having a pretty garden. By growing a diverse range of plants, we can actually attract beneficial insects, improve soil health, and create a more resilient food system.
It's about creating like a mini ecosystem within the city.
Right.
And it's not just about plants either. The handbook talks about attracting pollinators like bees and butterflies to urban gardens.
Oh, that's so important. We need to make sure those creatures have a place to thrive, even in the city. The handbook had some good tips for that too, like planting native wildflowers and making sure there are water sources for insects.
Yeah, it's all about remembering that we're part of a larger ecosystem, even in the city.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about something I thought was super interesting, urban foraging.
Oh, yeah. That section was a real eye-opener for me, too. I never realized how much edible food you could find just growing wild in the city.
I know, right? It's like a whole hidden world of food just waiting to be discovered.
The handbook lists all kinds of things that you can find in parks, sidewalks, vacant lots, wild berries, mushrooms, edible weeds.
But it sounds a little risky too, doesn't it? Like, what if you accidentally pick something poisonous?
Yeah, that's why it's so important to be cautious and do your research. The handbook emphasizes responsible foraging.
So making sure you can properly identify the plant and only taking a small amount so you don't damage the ecosystem.
Right, sustainability is key. And you want to be aware of any potential hazards like poisonous plants or polluted areas. It's always best to connect with local experts who can guide you. The handbook has some resources for that too.
It's amazing how much you can learn about the natural world just by exploring your own city.
It's like a treasure hunt for foodies. And it really makes you appreciate the abundance that's often hidden in plain sight.
This whole deep dive is really making me think about my relationship with the city in a new way. I'm starting to see all these opportunities to connect with nature and live more sustainably.
That's the beauty of urban agriculture. It's not just about growing food, it's about fostering this deeper connection to our surroundings and taking an active role in shaping a more sustainable future for our cities.
You know, as we've been talking, I've been thinking about how urban agriculture can help address food insecurity in cities too. The handbook mentioned that community gardens can provide fresh, healthy food for people who might not have access to it otherwise.
That's a really important point. Food deserts are a serious problem in a lot of urban areas. People don't have access to affordable, nutritious food.
And urban agriculture can help fill that gap by bringing fresh produce right into those communities.
Exactly. And it's not just about providing food, it's about empowering people to grow their own food. The handbook talked about how community gardens can teach valuable gardening skills and encourage healthy eating habits. It's about creating a more just and equitable food system where everyone has the opportunity to nourish themselves and their families with fresh, healthy food. And it's not just limited to community gardens either. There are urban farms that are specifically focused on providing food for low-income communities.
And some even partner with food banks to distribute their produce.
It's inspiring to see how people are using urban agriculture to address social issues and create a more inclusive and sustainable food system.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone deserves access to good food, regardless of their income or background. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to all the different aspects of urban agriculture.
Me too. It's so much more than just gardening. It's about creating a more resilient, sustainable, and just city for everyone. And it's exciting to see how this movement is gaining traction all over the world. As more people embrace urban agriculture, we can transform our cities into these thriving ecosystems that nourish both people and the planet.
It's amazing how this handbook has totally changed how I see the city. Now I'm just looking around and seeing potential gardens everywhere I go.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens.
Like even that empty lot down the street, I'm like, ooh, we can do something there.
That's the magic of urban agriculture. It shifts your perspective. Suddenly, you're seeing all these possibilities instead of limitations.
You know, one thing that really stood out to me in this handbook was the focus on water conservation. Especially in cities, being mindful of how we use water is so important.
Absolutely. There's a whole section dedicated to water sustainability in urban agriculture. It covers everything from rainwater harvesting to choosing plants that don't need a ton of water.
Oh yeah, I remember that part. It even talked about collecting rainwater from your roof to water your garden.
That's so smart.
I know, right? It's a brilliant way to make the most of the resources we have. And it's not just about saving water. It's
Hmm.
about reducing runoff and preventing pollution, too.
Yeah. The handbook mentioned using permeable paving materials in urban gardens so the water can soak back into the ground.
Exactly. It's about working with nature instead of against it.
Mm.
And speaking of working with nature, the handbook also talks about building healthy soil in urban environments.
Yeah. I loved that part. It emphasized composting as a way to recycle food scraps and yard waste into this nutrient-rich soil.
Composting is like the ultimate recycling.
It really is. And it reduces the amount of waste going to landfills.
Plus, you get this amazing soil amendment for your garden. It's a win-win,
Hmm.
and it's something that anyone can do even if you don't have a huge garden.
Yeah, I was surprised by all the different composting systems they talked about. Like, there are countertop composters for small spaces.
Oh yeah, and larger bins for community composting. There's something for everyone. They even talked about worm composting. I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, composting is a great option for people who want to compost indoors. Even if you're in a tiny apartment, you can still participate.
I love that. It's so cool how the handbook provides all these different options to fit people's different needs and lifestyles.
It's about empowering people to find solutions that work for them.
You know, as we've been going through this handbook, I've noticed how it goes beyond just the practical how-to stuff and delves into the social and community aspects of urban agriculture too.
Oh, absolutely. Urban agriculture is about so much more than just growing food. It's about growing communities too.
Yeah, the handbook talks about how community gardens can help people feel more connected, reduce social isolation, and even improve mental health.
It's amazing how working together in a garden can bring people
I
together.
know, it can break down barriers between people from different backgrounds and create this sense of shared purpose.
It's about creating a space where everyone feels welcome and valued.
I love that. And it's not just about community gardens. The handbook also explores the idea of urban farming as like a social enterprise.
Right. There are all sorts of innovative models out there.
Like those CSA programs, community supported agriculture, where people buy shares in a local farm and get a weekly box of fresh produce.
Yeah, CSAs are a great way to directly support local farmers and know exactly where your food is coming from. It creates this really cool connection between the farmer and the consumer.
Like a partnership.
Exactly. And it helps build a more resilient local food system.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, one thing that keeps sticking with me is this idea of resilience. The handbook talks about how urban agriculture can make cities more resilient to all sorts of challenges like climate change, economic instability, even pandemics.
Yeah, it's about creating a more localized and diversified food system that isn't so reliant on these long, fragile supply chains.
So if something happens like a natural disaster or an economic crisis, people still have access to food because
Yeah.
it's being grown right there in their community.
Right. It's about taking control of our food supply and building a more secure and sustainable future.
I'm definitely walking away from this conversation with a whole new appreciation for urban agriculture. It's not just a hobby, it's a movement.
I totally agree. It's about creating a better future for our cities and for ourselves.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. I'm so glad we had a chance to explore this handbook together. I feel really inspired to start putting some of these ideas into practice in my own life.
Me too. It's all about taking those small steps and making a difference. Whether it's starting a little herb garden on your balcony or volunteering at a community garden, every little bit counts.
That's a great reminder. Well, that brings our deep dive into urban agriculture to a close. Hopefully this conversation has inspired you to explore this topic further and maybe even get your hands a little dirty.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll all be enjoying fresh produce grown right in the heart of our own cities.
I can't wait for that. Until next time, happy gardening.